Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Day 12 of our 30-day challenge. And day 12 is about remembering. I had a conversation this morning with someone in the group, and he was reminding me of something that I reminded him about a few weeks ago. And I realized that the only reason he had to remind me was because I forgot. And I told him. And it dawned on me that as humans, we've been given this gift of memory. And repetition helps. But we have to constantly remind ourselves. We have to constantly remind ourselves of a lot of things. And remembering is not just about living in the past. It's about revisiting or recovering evidence of God's existence, God's providence, God's miracles in your life, in our lives. And by day 12 of our challenge, a lot of us have already forgotten why we even started. What is this 30-day challenge really about? I remember before we started, there was a lot of excitement. Everyone was looking forward to it. And by day 3, it kind of died down. And that's when I think that old identity started to whisper. And that's why remembering is so important. And you might ask, well, what do we remember? We have to remember what God has already been to you, what God has given you. Remember what you survived. Remember what was revealed to you. Some of us, we've been revealed or have been given guidance directly from God. And we forget. And that may have come through a dream, through a third party. Remember the old version of you. And remember what that cost you. The relationships, the old relationships that are no longer there. And remember what your future self requires with that investment, that sacrifice. And the opposite of remembering is forgetting. And forgetting is dangerous because when you forget, something else fills that place. And usually it's negotiation. You make excuses, you lower your standard, and you start doing things like calling fear wisdom and hesitation patience or discernment. But remembering is essential for bringing you back into alignment. And whenever we remember something, especially something that's godly, it takes us one step closer to being exactly the person that we were created to be. So one of the purposes of this 30-day challenge is not just discipline. Discipline is part of it, but it's identity recovery. Okay? Because there's a higher version of you that remembers. There's a higher version of you that does not hesitate. And you aren't becoming that person. You're not becoming you're not becoming somebody brand new. All you're doing is remembering the version of you that's already inside of you. Because if it wasn't inside of you, you wouldn't have seen it. And that person was put there by God. That person was put there before fear, before disappointment, before comfort, and before those old habits covered that person up. So I want you to think about, what have you forgotten today that you need to remember? What have you forgotten that will require you to remember to be that person that you said you were going to become? What promise have you forgotten? What about the pain? What about the sacrifice? What about the vision? When you first started this challenge, what vision did you see for yourself? And let's also remember who God called us to be. Because the moment you remember clearly, it's harder to live without purpose. It's harder to live casually. And this past Sunday in our fellowship group, we read about some examples of people that forgot. They forgot who God was, how powerful God was, who Jesus was. They forgot about deliverance. They forgot about their assignment. And they forgot about consequences. And the thing about forgetting is forgetting has a price. And if you're willing to pay the price to forget, then that's entirely up to you. But it does have a price. And we looked at Peter. When that pressure came, Jesus warned him, you're going to forget, you're going to deny me 3 times. But when the pressure came, Peter forgot. He declared loyalty to Jesus, but when fear came, he denied him. And fear made him forget. Fear made him forget who he was. Fear made him forget who Jesus was. But Peter's story is powerful because what restored him was when he remembered. Because even though he failed, 3 times he denied him. But Jesus reminded Peter who he really was. And so, yeah, he paid the price of forgetting, which was shame, guilt, and regret. But there was redemption. And I look at our lives and I ask, where have we forgotten and have felt shame, have felt guilt, but have not looked for the redemption? Because you might fail in these 30 days. You might have forgotten why you even started. But our goal here is not perfection. Okay, our goal is to remember who you are, and you do it fast enough so that you can return to getting back on that journey before the old identity takes over. We looked at Judas as well. And Judas had forgotten the value of being close. He forgot who Jesus was. Just imagine you walking with Jesus and seeing all these miracles and still losing perspective. If Judas could do it, what does that say about us? Judas was there in the midst of the miracles. So it tells us that nobody is above forgetting. And the thing about Judas is he was so consumed with money, with getting, that he lost sight of who was standing in front of him. And I think sometimes in our life, our relationships or our familiarity, it blinds us. We become so close to someone that we forget their importance. We take them for granted. And the cost of that for Judas was self-destruction, regret. And some of us are so focused on what we think is missing in our lives that we can't even recognize the miracle in front of us, the miracle that we're already connected to, the miracle of life, the miracle of provision. And that goes for the Israelites. We all remember what happened with them. They kept on crying. They saw miracles. They saw the Red Sea being parted. They saw manna from heaven. They were protected in the wilderness. But every single obstacle that came, they panicked like God had never moved before. I mean, they literally experienced supernatural deliverance and still kept wanting to go back to Egypt. And the cost was they lost generations in the wilderness and never saw the promised land. So think about that deeply for a second. They escaped Egypt where they were slaves and suffered. But mentally, they were still slaves. And we read these stories and it's like, man, how could they do that? But we do the same thing. God has delivered us from places, from people, from jobs. But we still allow ourselves to be mental slaves to other things. And we leave those environments, but we're still carrying that old identity of that old Egypt. So today, let's think about, because remembering is actually spiritual warfare. Because remember, the old identity, it survives because we forget. We forget the pain and then we repeat cycles. We forget the vision and then we start to lose focus. We start to drift. We forget the standards that we set for ourselves and now we start to compromise. You forget how God has brought you out of that desert, that wilderness, and then fear takes over. And that's one of the reasons why we do these rituals, why it's 3 times a day. why we do the journaling, why we start with the morning prayer, why we do the midday reflection, why we have a community that keeps us accountable, why we have affirmations, why we read the Bible, and why we have weekly conversations is because we're trying to remember. We don't want to forget. We need the constant reminders. And these things are not just activities that are great to be a part of when someone in the group speaks up. It's because we need to remember. Nobody is above remembering. And the person who remembers correctly, they move differently. So these systems that we're building are systems of remembrance. Yesterday, someone in our group mentioned something about the Matrix and Disney movies. And I think the Matrix is one of the clearest examples of remembering. It's a modern metaphor for spiritual remembrance because the whole movie is really about one thing. What happens when you remember who you really are? Are you the one? And Neo's battle was not really a battle against machines. His battle was against the programming. And I think that's the same battle that many of us fight in real life. We're fighting against old identities. We're fighting against fear, trauma. I keep saying comfort because what I came to realize is comfort, we were not designed for comfort. If you look at how God created every single thing on earth, and when I say we weren't designed for comfort, what I mean by that is extended periods of comfort as a sustainable way of living. It is not in our DNA. Extended periods of comfort lead to atrophy. Extended periods of comfort lead to decline. When we're not growing, we're dying. And comfort over a long period of time leads to death, which is why we have the good old 6 and 1, 6 days of work, 1 day of rest. It could have been 4 days of work, 3 days of rest. But we are made to grow, and growing requires discomfort. It's very uncomfortable. Okay, I was telling my wife this the other day that it never gets easier. You'll have moments of ease and then it gets hard. You'll have moments of hardship, then it gets easy. But in order to grow, this is just what we're called to do. And unless someone can show me evidence otherwise, this is what I believe. So with the Matrix, those fears, the failures, the opinions, those things create a matrix that tells people who they are and what is possible. Oh, if you're black, if you're a woman, you can't be a preacher. If you're a woman, you can't do this. If you are white, you can't do this. If you're this, if you're young, this is all programming. And I think the most dangerous part of it is most of us don't even realize that we're programmed. Most of us don't even realize that we were programmed from a young age. Our parents programmed us. Our society has programmed us. And that's why in the movie, Morpheus says, you've been living in a dream world. And I think that parallels the Bible deeply. Because remember, when the Israelites physically left Egypt, Egypt was still inside of them. They say you can take the man out the hood, but you can never take the hood out the man. And Neo, he left the Matrix, but the Matrix was still inside of him. So freedom is not just about leaving a place. It's about remembering the truth, which allows you to leave the place. And this is the importance of day 12. Neo had to remember before he could become. Neo had to remember before he could become. And at first, he doubted himself constantly. At first, he was living in doubt. He didn't know who he was. And even after he was chosen, even after he saw the miracles and saw all those things and got the instruction, he still doubted himself. And I asked myself why. And it's the same reason that we do it. It's because his old programming was fighting his new identity. He wanted to be the one. And this is the same thing we see with Moses, with Peter, Anytime someone is chosen for greatness, they struggle to believe it because their old identity still feels more real than their calling. And it's the same challenge for us. The future, your future self, already exists. But your programming, the programming you got, keeps rejecting it. When you go to buy that ticket, when you go to fill up that gas, when you go to lease that new office space, when you go to hire that new employee, that old identity is fighting and saying, that's not who we are. This is uncomfortable. Let's not do this. And it's only trying to protect you, but it doesn't know any better. Another thing I noticed about The Matrix was it survives through distraction and comfort. Because remember, in The Matrix, that movie, most people, they preferred illusion over truth. And Cypher, if you haven't watched the movie, there's a character named Cypher. He's one of the deepest characters because he knowingly chooses the fake world every time. Every time. And why did he do this? Because the truth is uncomfortable. And if you want to grow, it costs. Real growth costs. It costs discipline, responsibility. It costs isolation. It costs accountability. And a lot of people say they want freedom, but subconsciously what they want is comfort. Same thing with the wilderness. The Israelites wanted to return to Egypt because freedom felt harder than slavery. And think about that. People can become emotionally attached to bondage because bondage is familiar. And I know we're talking about The Matrix, but it's such a powerful movie. Morpheus represents remembrance. And he constantly reminds Neo, you are more than what they told you. And I mean, that Matrix, it's one of the most powerful movies that I've seen. And that is what mentors do. That's what scripture does. That's what journaling does. And that's what this challenge is supposed to do. It's not supposed to give you power. It's just supposed to remind you of the power that you have. And this is the power of the Bible. It reminds you over and over and over in the Bible. God says, remember the covenant. There was even a day there was even a place in the Bible where God instructed the people, I think it was twice or three times a year, to remember, take a day and just remember the good things that God has done. Remember what I brought you through. Remember who you are. Remember the miracles. Why? Because forgetting creates stagnation. It creates weakness. It creates struggle. And in The Matrix, they had these agents. They used to wear those glasses, and those agents, I think they represent systems that protect the old identity. They represent forces that attack liberation, awakening. Because the moment you start changing, that's when the fear appears. That's just an agent. That's when the doubt appears, another agent. Distractions, another agent. Old habits. And here's the thing, systems always resist transformation. Systems like to stay the way they are. So even psychologically, your brain likes familiarity because familiarity feels safe. So when you start becoming somebody new, the old person is going to fight for survival. And that's why we talked about self-sabotage. So finally, there was a scene in there that the child tells Neo, do not try and bend the spoon. That's impossible. Instead, only try to realize the truth. And Neo says, what's the truth? There is no spoon. And that's so powerful because sometimes the limitation that we see might be an illusion. And we look at this and we see it in some spiritual teachings. Fear is often a projection. Scarcity is often a perception. Identity is just conditioning. The fear of buying this ticket because I won't have enough money. You don't know that. That's an illusion. And so we become trapped sometimes by the agreement that we have with fear and says, oh, I'm not gonna do this because I think this will happen. So why do we have to remember? Because when we remember, it gives fear less authority. It's awakening. Okay, not learning for the first time, but awakening to what was already buried. And this is the power of day 12. Because a lot of us in this challenge are not building a new person. All we're doing is recovering the person that fear, survival, comfort, and programming has buried. The Matrix calls it a waking up. The Bible calls it renewing your mind. But they both describe the same thing. They both are essentially talking, and it's a war. It is a war. The Bible even calls it a spiritual warfare. We don't fight with flesh and blood. We fight with principalities. When people hear that, they get all scared and spooky. No, this is real. What do you think those thoughts in your head are? They're not flesh and blood. Those are spirituality. That's spirituality. And the war is between truth and programming. So today, ask yourself, what can I remember that's going to lead me to the highest truth today?